Before you even finish walking into a room, the people inside have already assigned you a capability score based on a metric you can't change: your height. In this video, we're breaking down the hidden disadvantages of every inch, from the infantilization tax at 4 feet 11 to the distortion wall that hits at 6 feet 2. Whether you're being bypassed because you're average or under physical strain because you're a giant, here is the hidden biology of how the world sees you, starting with the underestimated extremity, 4 feet 11 to 5 feet 2. Nobody's been openly rude. Not really. But your whole life, people have been making quiet decisions about you before you even speak. If it's ever felt like you're working twice as hard just to be taken half as seriously, there's a reason. And it starts before you open your mouth. Your smaller frame carries less thermal mass. Sounds technical, but it means you lose heat faster and have less energy reserve. In the ancient world, that was a real risk. Cold hits harder. Scarcity hits sooner. The efficiency is real, but so is the exposure. Then there's the social side. Researchers call it the Infantilization Tax. A smaller frame gets read as younger, and younger gets linked to inexperience. It happens in under 200 milliseconds, automatic. No one chooses it. But you still walk into rooms already judged. So you compensate. Sharper, louder, more assertive. Just to reach the baseline others get for free. It works. You build real skill. But it costs energy every single day. The disadvantage isn't weakness. It's invisible overhead. One thing that helps: lower your voice, slower, deeper. The brain registers authority before anything else. 5 feet 2 to 5 feet 6. The negotiation zone. You sit in a range where the disadvantage is almost impossible to name. That's what makes it so persistent. You're not short enough for people to consciously register it. You're not tall enough to access the automatic authority signals the brain assigns to above-average frames. What you have instead is a credibility ceiling that activates in high-stakes rooms. Physically, there's a slow cost most people miss. Smaller frames often start with slightly lower bone density. Bone mass peaks early, then declines. A lower starting point means you hit critical levels sooner. It's not certain, but it's a variable worth tracking long before it matters. The world also fits you slightly wrong. Desks, seats, counters, built for someone just a bit taller. Not enough to notice once, but repeated daily, it becomes constant friction you rarely trace back. Socially, the stature heuristic works quietly against you. The brain tends to assume taller people are more capable. You sit just below that threshold, and because you look close to average, you may not notice the credibility gap already in play. If it were obvious, you'd adjust. Because it isn't, many spend years solving a problem they haven't named. One thing that helps: in groups, take the center. People at the edges get ignored, interrupted, and forgotten. Position shapes perception more than you think. 5 feet 7 to 5 feet 8. The behavioral neutral. The danger of 5 feet 8 isn't being small. It's being invisible in a world that rewards outliers. You aren't being judged. You're being bypassed. Your height triggers no strong reaction. It doesn't anchor a first impression like a tall presence. It doesn't spark curiosity the way shorter frames sometimes do. You register as neutral. And neutral, in a world built on standing out, is a disadvantage wearing comfortable clothes. The brain remembers outliers. Very tall, very short, anything unusual. What sits in the middle gets processed and quietly dropped. In sales, leadership, any space where being memorable matters. Average doesn't compound. It fades. You're not being underestimated. You're being forgotten, which is harder to fix. There's a subtler cost. Because the world fits you, there's no friction pushing you to adapt. Shorter people learn to project. Taller people learn to manage attention. You're never forced into either. That gap shows up later, in moments that reward those exact skills. One thing that helps: give people something to remember. A consistent visual signature, a color, a style, something repeatable, creates a hook your height doesn't. Not vanity. Strategy. 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 11. The sweet spot that isn't entirely sweet. You're in the range. Researchers point to when they talk about biological balance. Your heart handles the load well. Your joints sit near the mechanical middle. Longevity data often leans in your favor. From a survival standpoint, you're built efficiently. But there's a cost hidden inside that advantage, and most people in this range never notice it. More height means more cells. More cells mean more divisions, and more chances for small errors. Cancer at its core is a copying mistake the body misses. Studies tracking height and cancer risk show a quiet pattern. Risk rises slightly as height increases. Not alarming here, just real. A subtle trade-off inside an otherwise well-balanced frame. Socially, the downside is harder to see because it feels like a benefit. You walk in with a bit more authority by default, a little more trust, a little more attention. But that also sets a higher bar. And missing that bar hits harder. A shorter person who seems uncertain reads as unsure. You, in that same moment, can read as inconsistent. Same behavior, different judgments. Because expectations were set before you spoke. The advantage isn't free. It comes with quiet pressure. One thing that helps: eat like your cells are doing extra work, because they are. An anti-inflammatory diet isn't fear, it's support. 5 feet 11 to 6 feet 2. The pedestal problem: people take you seriously before you've earned it. That feels good. For a while, then you start noticing something strange. Nobody really pushes back on you. Disagreements get softened. Challenges arrive gently, if they arrive at all. And gradually, without realizing it, you stop getting accurate information about your own performance. If you're in this range, have you ever felt like people were just telling you what you wanted to hear? That's the pedestal problem in action. Physically, the body is beginning to pay a higher maintenance cost. The circulatory system is working harder to push blood through a longer network, and this range is where the risk of varicose veins and blood pooling in the lower legs starts to climb. Joint stress from longer limbs is rising. None of it feels dramatic on a Tuesday. It accumulates across years. But the social cost is the one most people never see coming. When you're perceived as dominant, people self-censor. They tell you what you want to hear more reliably than what you need to hear. Research on leadership and height finds this pattern consistently. Taller people receive less critical feedback than shorter peers at identical performance levels. The room adjusts to you, and a room that has adjusted to you has quietly stopped being useful to you. That's the real disadvantage here. Not the deference, the distortion. You've been handed a pedestal, and pedestals, as anyone who's stood on one long enough knows, are places where growth slows. The feedback that forces development gets filtered out before it reaches you. You only discover what that cost by the time something finally breaks through the silence. One thing that helps: make it structurally safe for people to disagree with you. Not occasionally, but habitually. Visibly defer to others early in group settings. Actively invite friction. The people around you have been quietly editing themselves. Give them a reason to stop. 6 feet 2 to 6 feet 5. The glass wall. There's a version of this height that looks like pure social advantage. People give you space. They don't interrupt. Rooms recalibrate around your presence almost automatically, and all of that is real. But there's a wall built into that dynamic that most people at this height spend years bumping into without ever seeing. When your frame triggers the brain's threat response, people don't just defer, they guard themselves. They speak more carefully. They reveal less. They form an impression of you quickly and revise it slowly. The social information you receive is permanently filtered, and the filter is invisible to you. Nobody is ever quite fully relaxed around you the way they would be around someone who registers as physically neutral. That matters enormously in environments that run on trust, collaboration, and genuine openness. A less imposing person never has to actively work to make people comfortable enough to be honest with them. You do. Every relationship that requires real candor from another person requires extra effort just to get past the automatic caution your presence generates without you asking it to. Physically, the cardiovascular system is now under real and measurable strain. The heart is working meaningfully harder. The architectural mismatch, cars, airplane seats, desks, beds, begins creating cumulative spinal stress that most people at this height only start counting after years of small compressions have added up. One thing that helps: your spine shouldn't be adapting to your furniture. Raise the desk. Adjust everything to fit you rather than working around things built for someone else. The postural damage from years of architectural mismatch is quiet, cumulative, and largely preventable. 6 feet 5 to 6 feet 11. The burden of being noticed. You already know the part where you can't walk into a room quietly. That's not a hidden disadvantage. That's just Tuesday. The hidden part is what that constant visibility actually costs over time, and how it slowly adds up in ways most people never have to think about. Privacy barely exists here, not in the way most people experience it. Every public space becomes a social moment, whether you want it or not. People stare, people comment, people ask the same questions they've asked every tall person before you, usually with a smile, like it's brand new. Over time, that kind of attention builds a specific kind of exhaustion. Not from one bad interaction, but from never being able to simply exist in public without being noticed. For the giants watching, what's the one question you're most tired of answering? Physically, the joint leverage tax becomes your everyday reality. Long limbs act like levers, and those levers amplify. Force at impact. Every step, every movement, places added torque on your knees and lower back compared to shorter frames doing the same thing. A CL strain, lumbar pressure, hip wear, they build up faster and show up earlier. It's not a possibility. It's a pattern that comes with the structure. Socially, there's another shift. Honest feedback becomes harder to find. Deference increases. People soften disagreement or avoid it completely. That means getting clear, unfiltered input about how you're actually doing takes real effort because the environment around you adjusts itself to your presence. One thing that helps, build your posterior chain consistently. The torque from your height isn't going away. The only control you have is how well your body is trained to handle it. 7 feet and above. The outer limit. At this height, the body is operating beyond its natural comfort range, and almost every system reflects that in some way. The heart is managing a circulatory column it was never really optimized for. Keeping steady blood pressure from chest to feet against gravity creates constant cardiovascular strain. Blood flow to the extremities becomes harder than it should be. Cold hands, cold feet, and weaker peripheral circulation turn into a steady background condition instead of an occasional issue. Compression socks and leg elevation aren't optional at this height, they're basic care. Your heart is working against gravity over a longer distance than it was designed for. Anything that supports blood returning upward reduces that long-term strain. The caloric demand of simply existing at this size is high. In any time before stable food supply, maintaining a body this large would have been extremely difficult. Today, it's possible, but it's never without cost. Socially, there's no neutral way to enter a space. There's no version of walking into a room that does not become an event. Every interaction is filtered through a reaction to your body before it becomes an exchange between two people. And one of the least talked about costs at this height is the quiet loss of normal interaction. The experience of being treated first, as something useful, for sports or reaching high places, before being seen as a person. It isn't meant to offend. It's just what happens when physical presence dominates attention so completely that it shapes every first impression. The real disadvantage at any height was never just the height itself. It's what that height triggers automatically in other people's minds before either of you has time to decide anything. Height writes the first sentence of every interaction. What decides if that becomes the whole story is what you do in the few seconds before the room settles on its judgment. Comment your height below and tell me, which hidden disadvantage did we miss? I'll be reading the stories, and watch the next video on the screen.